I sat into some of the sessions sort of yesterday afternoon and obviously this morning. There's been a lot of chat about imposter syndrome. I am definitely feeling that right now because I'm imagining the only one in this room who doesn't work in the music industry. So I'm praying that some of this makes sense. And if it doesn't, please tell me. So I'm going to talk a bit about how data in sport has changed culture. I think is probably a bit strong. Is changing culture is probably more accurate. But I'm going to rattle through to give you a bit of context, sort of my first 4 or 5 slides, just to give you kind of an idea of a bit about who I am and why I'm here, I guess. And also just a bit about the business that I work for now that will give you kind of a context for everything else I'm going to talk about. So hopefully it makes sense. So a bit about me. I am a sport fan first. I think it was interesting hearing some stuff yesterday when you were talking about the industry that you work in. And I think someone was asked, Pat, I think was asked, you know, what do you do when things are on top of you and how do you remind yourself about why you're doing it? And I think for me, that's why I remind myself about it. You know, I am a sport fan first. I'm very fortunate in my 12-year career in this industry to have been able to go to some of the biggest sporting events in the world, to be actually in the changing room for some of the biggest sporting events in the world. So I do have to remind myself of that sometimes where things get tough. But I did start as an athlete. So I do have some caps for Wales as a hockey player. That is a very old picture. I'm getting married this summer, and so I'm on a pretty heavy diet, and I'm trying to get back to that, but it's not going to happen. So I have played at the elite level as well, and actually that gave me the push and the drive to try and get into the sports industry as a hockey player, other than actually being in Holland, which is probably the best place in the world for playing hockey. And I have been in Amsterdam to play hockey and got my ass kicked on multiple occasions. So very fond memories of Amsterdam. But my first love is actually rugby. Although I have to say, I did not expect to come and speak at a music industry conference and be the second best rugby player that spoke here today. So thanks, Kelly. But yeah, first passion is really rugby. But like hockey, there isn't as much money in the game and not as many opportunities to be involved in that sport. And so I ended up in football. But I've also played a lot of different sports, including baseball, when I spent some time in London. So I have been around, played a lot of different sport, and that really drives why I'm interested in this industry and why I ended up getting into it. But it's all underpinned by a degree in sports science from Liverpool John Moores, and that really did give me the foundations to try and do what I did next. So a little bit about my career so far. I started in 2007, working for Everton Football Club, working in their academy. For those who don't know, that's Ross Barkley, who now has played for England and plays for Chelsea. He was a 14-year-old little shit, but a very talented player. So someone I'm very proud to see what he's gone on to achieve. I then moved on to Fulham. And worked 2.5 years in a lovely part of London, working at the time for a club who was massively punching above their weight, and that really kind of sums up a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, is how analytics and data can actually help you fight against a lack of resource, or certainly in our industry, a lot of money in other parts of the game. I then went even further down and went to Reading. And actually went to Reading at a point where they just got promoted to the Premier League, and I was asked to go in and essentially set up a European scouting department from scratch. And when I mean from scratch, all they had was a filing cabinet with a bunch of reports in them, and that was basically it. So we built a scouting department, we built a European strategy, and I then went and scoured Europe for talent that could help us stay in the league, which was incredibly challenging to the point where we got relegated. I have been relegated twice, but I've also been to the Europa League final, so it balances out. Then spent a little bit of time at Norwich, just helping out with the scouting department and giving them some kind of consultancy work. And then my last club was Burnley. Again, to go in there at a club that was trying to achieve bigger things with basically no budget, and try and use data and technology to give them an edge above the competitors who were millions and millions of pounds ahead. So that's gone pretty well, and they're still in the league, so I'm pretty proud of that one. And then I decided, I think, like most industries, when you're in it for so long and you're right inside it and it was something you love, you often get a bit tired of it after a while. And actually football is probably my third or fourth favourite sport, and probably has dropped even further down having worked in it for 10 years. So I think you get a different perspective. And so I joined Opta Pro, who are a big data company. They're part of a much bigger group called the Zone Group. And we have an OTT platform, which is called the Zone. If there's any Germans or Italians in the audience, then you may have heard of it. So that's a big part of our business, but the business that I am a sit in as Opta Pro is a B2B business that provides data and content to broadcasters, to media outlets. Basically, anytime you watch a football, cricket, rugby event, we are going into the sports, and you see a statistic on the screen, that's generally come from us. But I run the division of Opta that focuses exclusively on professional clubs across rugby, cricket and football. We only work on the performance side. We're actually very separate from the rest of the business because the rest of the business is driven by digital media broadcasters. We're very separate. We stay separate for a reason, because we want to build that trust, something that was talked about this morning. And we also have a set of experts in our team, people like me who've been in the industry and have worked on the coaching side or in the backroom staff. We have a couple of ex-players. We've got ex-players in all three sports. So very specific. And we're working with about 350 plus teams, governing bodies, leagues, federations around the world, 14 or 15 countries. And we're supporting their processes and how they use data and technology to improve performance. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of how that works. These are just a couple of the big partnerships that we have and the leagues that we support, including the Eredivisie, who I got some time with the last few days. So this is really just to set up everything else I'm going to talk about. So this is the data that we have. We have, for every match, we have about 2,000 events, so things that happened in the game. And that is based on a huge database of over, it says now, 520,000 elite footballers across men's and women's football. That is kind of biographical data, who they are, age, how many games they've played, very basic stuff. And then on top of that, we layer this performance data, the elite data, which is this 2,000 events per game. And we do that for 45 domestic competitions around the world. And we do it all live. So the guys on the screen there, you can see in the top corner, we have, I think, 5 or 6 offices around the world there's 3 people for every game. We get a live video stream into our office, and we have 1 guy for each team, or girl, and somebody in the middle who is checking the data that they're collecting. And it is all done live because it has to go to broadcasters, it has to go to betting companies, and it has to go to the pro teams as the games are happening. So interesting hearing a conversation about AI this morning and that kind of thing. So one of my roles outside of running Opta Pro is actually part of an innovation insights team that's looking at new technology. So we're also looking heavily, I think as every industry is, at AI and machine learning, something called computer vision, which is to identify what's happening on a screen and trying to collect data from it. At the moment, we use people, a lot of them, to collect all of that information live. I can't even think how many games we collect every weekend. Tom, who's my colleague sitting over there, who's the one that does look like he should be in the music industry with that haircut. He actually started as collecting the data, and we have people like that all over our business who then grow into other roles and get involved in other parts of the business. So that's how we collect the data. I could spend all day on that, but I won't. But it gives you an idea of the size of data set that we're working with. But then you have to make that relevant to people, whether that's people watching on a broadcast, whether that's people reading it in a newspaper, whether it's social media content, or whether it's, for me, it's about improving performance and trying to convince a coach or a manager or a director of football who's making decisions on transfer targets. You've got to convince them that it's the right decision to make. But I think, like a lot of industries, but particularly in sport, it still is that gut feel. It's that, yeah, he's good. Well, quantify that for me. No, he's just, I know. I've been in the game, I know it. Yeah, that's a challenge. So I'm going to talk a bit about kind of the things that I learned, and the best piece of advice I ever got was from a coach at Everton. It must have been my first few weeks working at the club. And I was this plucky, student who thought he knew everything about football and had watched a bunch of games and all that stuff. And the guy sat me down. I don't know whether I'd been a bit cocky, probably. But he sat me down and said, look, I'm going to give you one piece of advice. Forget everything you think you know about the game and just listen and learn from all the people that do. And that has stayed with me for my whole career, because listening is an incredibly hard skill, and it's kind of ironic talking to the music industry about listening. But it is incredibly difficult. And if you think you know stuff, but then you sit around ex-players and some of the best minds in football, and you realize actually you watch the game in a completely different way, I can pretty much guarantee that if any of you watch the football match, you'd all see it slightly differently. But I would see it completely differently to all of you. And that's why it's completely spoilt my ability to enjoy a football match, because I analyze everything that happens. It was interesting listening to Mackriell yesterday. I'm a very, very, very amateur musician. Very, very, very. Just remember that. And so I've tried writing music and tried writing songs and all that kind of thing. And I think listening to those guys yesterday, I realized why I'm not very good at it. And it's probably because of all of this. It's because I'm very analytical and I need a process and I need to kind of think stuff through. And listening to those guys yesterday made me realize that maybe I should stop thinking. That's not a criticism. So just to kick this off and to give you a bit of context about the industry I work in, I've got a bit of a sneak preview into a meeting I was in a few months ago. See if you can recognize which one I am.
I like guys like that. They got a little hair on their ass.
He looks like a man on our maze, quite frankly. He's got a baseball body.
Matty, who do you got?
I like Geronimo.
Yes.
Hey, guy's an athlete, big, fast, talented,
Top of my list.
Clean cut, good face.
Yeah, good job.
5 tools time. Good looking ball player.
Can he hit?
Yeah, he's got a beautiful swing, right, Barry?
Ball explodes off his bat.
He throws the club head at the ball, and when he connects, he drives it. It pops off the bat. You can hear it all over the
A
ballpark.
lot of pop coming off the
And
bat.
it's effort.
If he's a good hitter, why doesn't he hit good?
He is a good hitter.
Minor leaguer, he'll be ready.
Yeah, so he's going to be a good hitter when we put him up against big league arms.
Could be a great
I
hitter.
don't think so.
This kid
guy
needs some
can
at bats.
play.
You give him 400 at bats, he's going to get better.
He can play.
He's hit everywhere along the line. It's one of our guys. Okay, let's move on. Artie, who do you like?
I like Perez. He's got a classic swing. It's real clean stroke.
Can't hit the curveball.
Well, there's some work to be done, I'll admit that,
there
but he's noticeable.
Got an ugly girlfriend.
What's that mean?
Ugly girlfriend means no confidence.
Okay.
Oh, no, you guys are full of it. Artie is right. This guy's got an ant.
Yeah. So that pretty, sums up a lot of the scouting meetings I was in. That clip goes on to say his girlfriend's a 6 at best, which means, no confidence. He's soft because he's wearing gloves and doing his hair in the tunnel. That was a comment made by a manager I worked with about a player we were very interested in signing. So soft, got gloves on. He's a good shape. What the hell does that mean? Played for a club who said he's never played up here, so he won't get it. Yeah, there's a massive difference between the north of England and the Midlands. And then the classic one, which is my mate says he's good enough. ultimately, that pretty much sums up the state of the football industry and the state of most sports industries when it comes to how they make decisions. That's what drives a lot of it. It's that kind of opinion, and it's that gut feel. And so people who do the jobs like I do, we have to try and find other ways to convince people that there's better ways to make decisions. And let's not forget, football clubs are making multi-million pound decisions on a regular basis with that kind of backing to those decisions. So it's a pretty scary world, but something we've tried to help change. So the first thing is you've got to speak their language, and kind of that thing of listening and trying to understand where people come from, and then also trying to learn the game from the people who have been in it. I can come in with a whole stack of spreadsheets and data and query tools and technology, but if I don't understand the game and I can't speak to those people using the terminology they use, then I've got no chance. That's the kind of stuff we use on a regular basis. It's code, it's data, it's tables. But if I can't get it to translate to Pep Guardiola in a tactical way, he's not going to use it, and it's not going to change decision making. It's a little phrase I've coined, tables to tactics. That table there is pretty useful to me. It basically describes how players pass to each other in a game. So the number of passes between players, and I can look at that table and I can pretty quickly work out who is the most common passing partnership, and I can sort of break that down, and I know straight away where we should be targeting, who we should be looking out for. But for a coach, they haven't got the time, goldfish is being kind, they're not going to grab that stuff straight away, so we have to figure out a way of presenting it differently. So we came up with this. This describes exactly the same thing, but what it shows is it's amazing what happens when you put some stats on a green pitch. And suddenly they go, I get that, I've seen that, I recognize that. So that's what we did, and that's what we've done a lot of, is putting it into a context that they understand. There's 11 players on the pitch, and there's lines between them. The thicker the line, the more they pass to each other. It's really, really simple. It's exactly the same as that table, but they get that. And that's incredibly important, because in an industry like sport, where you're making very quick decisions, you've got 90 minutes to change a game, that helps. That probably doesn't. It's not going to get you there very quickly. Quantifying column says, I just had a very quick chat with James, and he massively criticized something that we worked really hard on, so I've now got to convince him that it actually means something. No. So, not controversial thoughts. So, goals and the quality of opportunities you get to score a goal is something that we have been talking about since the first person kicked the football. It's the ability, you come out of a game and you go, yeah, we should have won that game because we had really good chances to score. And every fan talks about that. And what we looked at was we said, well, can we quantify that? Can we quantify the idea that not only did we have more shots than the opposition, but actually those shots were better quality chances? And it's that idea of converting data in, not just looking at quantity of how many things happened and when they happened and where they happened, but what was the quality of those things that happened. And that's really hard to do. And there's a lot of data science and wizardry in the background to make this happen. But we came up with a thing called expected goals, which is a bit of a wanky title, but that's marketing for you. Sorry, Kelly. The idea of that is basically, how many goals would you expect your team or your players to score if from that location on the pitch, we looked at the 100,000 million shots that we've got in our database that happen in that exact location based on all the things that came before it? Would we expect a player to score X percentage of time? And that's essentially quantifying that thing that everyone talks about in sport, is how good was the quality of chances. So we came up with this, and it started to leak out into the media. And then we needed to come up with a way of kind of visualizing that. So not only, how many shots did we have, which is all the red dots, but actually how good was the quality of chances that we had. And so the bigger the circle, the bigger the percentage chance of scoring from that location on the pitch. So all of these things are trying to go back to sport first. One of the biggest problems certainly in the sports industry, we have with data, is we have a stack of it. But what we try and do is we look at the data and we go, right, what can I cram this into to make it reflect something that people will understand? How can I make all of this data set mean something to somebody? Right, well, I'll kind of cram it into this thing. I'll give it some football title that people will get, and that'll be fine. And it doesn't work like that.
Sorry to interrupt.
Go, Chris.
Does that vary by the size, shape, general ability of the opposition keeper or not?
Yeah, so well, it doesn't actually take into account the keeper. So this model takes into account how the ball arrived at the player who had the shot and where he was on the pitch. And then based on a probability model, how likely is he to score from that location? So what we're trying to do now is we're starting with the sport. And I come from a sport-first background, not a data-first background. So what I'm trying to do is we're trying to look at the analytics side of it and say, well, what are the things that we are trying to quantify? What are the things that coaches and players and pundits and broadcasters and the average fan, what are the things they understand? What are the things they want to talk about? And then how do we make the data tell you that story? So that's just some of the things that we try and do. But the other way you can do that is you can combine data sets. So this is a scouting report on a player. Within our team, we have a scouting activity. So we watch a lot of football, as you can imagine, and we write scouting reports, and we can provide that back to teams. But scouting reports are generally written through text, and it's opinion, and that has huge value in the game still. And I'll never tell you anything different. You've got to be able to watch the game and understand from a tactical perspective and experience perspective, are these players or is this team any good at what they're trying to do? But we can also quantify that. So one of the ways you can win people over is by using data that they actually created themselves. Convert the text, convert the things that they are looking at and the things that they write down, convert it into data, and then combine it with the more quantitative-led data that we have from a performance perspective, bring them both together, and use that to evaluate whether your scouts are seeing the same thing as you're seeing in the data. Is the data telling you something different? So this graphic here basically brings together the rating that a scout gave these players in ball control. And then we have a metric, a quantitative-led metric that says this is how good they are over the season at ball control. And we put the two together. And what this shows is that actually, for some of these players, we may have seen his best game ever when we saw him as a scout, because he performed exceptionally well. But the data says, over a season, actually, he's not as good as you think. But it can also work the other way. You know, it can work that actually we didn't see some of the things in the data that you saw on the pitch. And there's still a stack of stuff we can't quantify with data. And so we have to take that into account. We have to be aware of that. If you bring the two together, it tends to help win people over because they go, well, I collected that data from me watching the game. So I'm going to back that up. But if you can tell me something different, you know, one of the best things about data is it can challenge opinion. It doesn't have to change it. It just has to challenge it. You know, it just has to challenge, are you absolutely sure that's what you think? And that's what we try and do in the sports industry. But ultimately, coaches, players, managers, the fans, they want to watch the game, they want to watch football. And so video does tell 1,000 numbers. You can put as many numbers on a graphic or on a pitch or in a table as you want, but actually, unless it relates back to the game and the things they understand, then you've got no chance. So this graphic here is a new metric that we've been building that kind of describes the tactical style of a team, the way a team plays. And this is just one piece of that. So it shows here that the New York Red Bulls are far ahead of everyone else in MLS in the transition phase. And I won't bore you to death with what that means. But what we did, we actually launched this new model in our Chicago event in January. I definitely feel Chris is pain about putting on global events. And what we tried to do was we said, well, actually, this started with a tactical idea. This came from some stuff that I'd done with coaches in the way that they talk about the game, and we tried to convert it into data. But ultimately, unless they understand it on the pitch, then it's not going to work. So we stick the stat at the top of the screen, and then we show the video. We show what this is quantifying. And then, it's amazing. As I said before, everybody in this room will watch this, probably even this clip differently. But imagine you put these clips in front of a footballer or a group of 20-odd footballers. You need them to all see the same thing. So very simple things like putting these graphics over the top of the players, showing them exactly what you want them to see, has an enormous impact on the way that they ingest information and the way that they then make decisions. It's very, very simple stuff. So always try and convert it back to something they understand and something they know. And that is how you can help change decisions, because then they become a lot more comfortable with what you're telling them, because they know it relates back to something that they recognize, which ultimately is, those white lines and a green pitch. So just a little bit about, I was told I was allowed to use different sports, which as you can imagine, football being the global game, you spend a lot of time talking about football. And when it's your third or fourth favorite sport, you get a bit bored of it. So we are going to talk about a couple of my other favorite sports. So these guys in a box, if anyone's a rugby fan or like a lot of people, certainly in Europe, I think, they get they're not rugby fans, they don't watch it, but when the Six Nations is on, they're quite happy to go around to their mates for a beer and watch it. So if you are watching the Six Nations at the moment, or you watch any rugby match, you'll often, particularly in a broadcast, you'll see them pan to the stands, and there's a box that looks a little bit like that. And the coaches are sat in there, and there's a stack of laptops. There's Apple Macs, generally covered with some kind of branding. And my mate Darren, who's in the middle of that with the glasses, is the performance analyst for Gloucester Rugby. And one of the things that rugby has done better than any other sport is bring the coaching and analysis and data side together. And it's primarily because they only became professional in 1995. And so when the kind of evolution of professionalism came in, they wanted to embrace anything they could get their hands on, which at the time was a kind of influx of technology and data and trying to be smart with decision making. Whereas with football, we've been professional for 40, 50 years. And so there's a lot of people still around who remember what it was like before technology was there. That's not really the case in rugby. They're also better educated. But generally, these guys have an enormous impact on the live action. And again, if you watch a Six Nations game, there'll be 3 or 4 laptops, the coaches will be in front of them, and they will be making in-game decisions based on the data that's coming through from us. So the difference there, though, is that they're able to then convert that into something that the coaches can understand and make quick decisions. And if anyone's kind of interested in this at all, I'd recommend you watch not only the Moneyball film, but also the kind of documentaries about the British and Irish Lions team, because that's a fascinating insight into elite sport, but it also shows you a lot about how the players prepare and how much time they spend ingesting information and then having to convert that into something that actually changes performance. So this is just a very quick graphic just to show you what a game week looks like. So this was basically my life for about 6 or 7 years. And this is how every week kind of flows. And there's a very good reason why I left this job, because that's basically what happened every week. It's just the team changed. So you have to start with what did the opposition do in the last 3 or 4 games. You've been to watch those teams play live. I actually spent a big chunk of my time in clubs never actually seeing the team I worked for play, because I was spending all my time watching who we were playing next. So, that's a big part of the job. You then have to convert that into something the coach can use in his training week. So you have to be able to give him something at the beginning of the week, bearing in mind we played Saturday and it's already Monday, and we're already thinking about next week. He's got to be able to prepare the players and the team in a way that will help them on the Saturday. So that's 3 or 4 days worth of training. You've got to get that information to them pretty quickly. There's a reason we work sort of 23-hour days. Then it has to be something you look at the data and over time. Then it's into video. Convert that into video so that players can understand. Then it's specific things for the players. How is it going to help them? And then ultimately it's game day. And then as soon as the game finishes, literally as soon as the game finishes, it's how did we play and what we're going to do next week. And that is, from August to May every year, that's every week. Some little bits from cricket. So again, in cricket, you'd think that they were really embracing data because the whole game revolves around numbers, but it's actually really difficult to convince them as well. It's a very old school type sport, gentleman's game. So we look at a lot of things about win probability and how can you help the team to understand what benchmarks do they need to get to help them win. But again, you need to present it in a cool, funky way, even for coaches and managers with pictures of players on it, because they'll look at that a lot more than they'll look at that. And then just sort of finally, really, this gives you an idea of the kind of process of trying to integrate data into a workflow. So this is basically how the majority of teams look to recruit players and look to recruit talent, and they work through this process, but data has an enormous part to play in every piece of that. And then this just gives you an idea of, again, a way that we can quantify players, creating an efficiency score for how efficient players are, and then mapping them onto a graph like this to try and fit who the players are that you have, the players in red for Ajax, and then the players who fit around them, who are similar to them, that we could then go and look at with scouting. Again, this is just directive. This is what we think from a data perspective. Now go and look at the video. Now go and watch them play. But these are the players that they're like. If you remember, we have 520,000 players. You've got to get the number down a little bit because you can't watch all those 520,000 players. So you've got to figure out a way to do it better, and that's what we use data for. And then finally, powering the future. So we have some fantastic relationships with governing bodies like the English FA, the Dutch FA, the KNVB here, who are ultimately trying to future-proof their talent pipeline. They're trying to make sure that there's constantly good young talent coming through through the business and through into either into the Eredivisie here in Holland, or they're going to sell those on and make money. So this is just a little bit about what we do with the US soccer and with the KNVB. And basically it's about tracking players from under 11s football in their country, having a database that tracks all of those players across the country. And you imagine the size of the US, that's a pretty tough job. And then being able to index that with video, being able to quantify their development pathway. And basically they're just trying to make sure that they are catching every possible talent that there is in their country, and making sure that that then evolves into something that ultimately makes them a better team on the pitch. And this is just one of the ways they do that. So they look at the current US women's national team. It's a couple of the players on the left there, how they rank in terms of their impact on the game. And then on the right-hand side is future potential US women's national team players. And how closely are they mapping against those players? One of the pieces of analysis we do quite a lot now is we profile elite players that have played for a team or for a country. And then we look at the talent that's coming through and said, what did this player, this elite player who's potentially at the end of his career now, what did he look like when he was the same age? How did he perform at 18, 19, 20? What did his pathway look like? What did he do over his career? And how can we make sure that this kid also follows that path? And that's essentially what we're doing with the US soccer team. So in very quick summary, speak the language of your audience. Know how they term things and make sure you match that. And base your data on commonly used terminology that reflects the sport or the industry that you're in, so you're talking the same language. You do have to compromise. It can't always be quantitative data, but sometimes using qualitative data and turning that into numbers can mean that you can win them over because it's the numbers that they created. Data visualizations has to be relevant to them. Stick it on a green pitch and they'll get it. But you have to have patience. It takes time. As I said at the beginning, we haven't changed the football industry or the sports industry with data. We are changing it, and it takes a lot of time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. That was absolutely brilliant. I've got a zillion questions, but I'm going to bug you over lunch. Who's got a question? So the mic coming just behind Karen, and then we'll get around. See Felix at the back as well, but you're a Chelsea fan, so it's marginal.
I'll leave him out.
Tottenham.
Oh dear.
Not oh dear at all, actually.
No, very good. Very good deal on that.
I know you collect all the data using humans, so surely there's margins of human error.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the biggest challenges we have is what can we see and what can a computer see? So a big part of my my role outside of running this is looking at that new technology, and ultimately the technology is just not there yet. It was fascinating to listen to, I think it was Catherine yesterday who was talking about facial recognition. What underpins that technology is the same thing we're looking at. Can a computer see the same things a coach can see or see one of our analysts can see, and can they track that in real time? And ultimately they can't yet, but when they can, we will be the first people to invest in it. So yeah, it is a massive challenge.
Perfect. Felix, go on.
Hey, that was great. I work as an A&R, so looking at new talent and making decisions on where to allocate money for the company.
Okay.
And I'm interested in the return model in sport, because if I sign a song and I spend X, it's very obvious if it's made money or not.
Yep.
And if you're looking at talent, how do you decide if you've overspent in an acquisition sort of model? And is it just as simple as victories is success? Because in music you can overspend on something, and you can also miss out on something and you should have spent more. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think the Moneyball concept, for those who don't know, the Moneyball idea came from baseball. And the idea was that you were trying to use data to identify things that other people undervalued, and that you then spend money on that rather than overspending on talent that potentially could fizzle out. Yes, it's all ultimately about winning games, and that's what keeps us in business. But actually, what we also use data for, and what we also look at talent for, is not only the players that will have an impact on my team right now, but also can we sell them so that we can buy 2 players for the money that we spent on developing 1 player. So that is a huge challenge. I think where you spend your money, it is a lot about your current needs. I think in the sporting industry, it's about understanding what the needs are right now, but also what are going to be the needs in 2-3 years' time. So one of the things we do a lot of with data is say, let's make sure we're not blocking the path of something that's coming through. Because if we spend, sort of what you're saying there, if we spend a lot of money on a player and we stick him on a 3-year contract, but there's a kid who's a year behind him who we've literally spent, all we've done is just develop him through our academy. We've massively overspent on this player who we're stuck with for 3 years, and we had this kid underneath who cost us nothing, and actually we've blocked his ability to move forward. So yeah, one thing I will say about the football industry is that unfortunately transfer fees, salaries are still very much finger in the air. It's what they want to demand. I imagine it's very similar in the music industry. If they demand a certain number and you're willing to pay it, then you're probably going to have a deal. Unfortunately, that's what we're still stuck with a lot in football. So.
Cool. Do you find you get a better accuracy in sports like cricket, like baseball, where one guy throws one thing at one person, they hit it once, it goes to one person who probably picks it up again?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, and that's why sports like baseball and actually US sports in general have embraced data in a way that we haven't necessarily done in Europe, because they're a lot easier to quantify. There is, it's a 1v1 matchup, whereas in football, there's 22 guys running around a pitch and they're all important.
I mean, my best contribution to football was standing on the left touchline, distracting the guy who's meant to be doing a different job, because I wasn't very good. I was pretty quick, but once I got there, I was useless. He doesn't know that for the first half. Yeah. I just stood there out of the way distracting him. He's looking in the wrong place, centre-back spread out. I am valuable.
Yeah. Well,
not as valuable as someone who can kick the ball, but still.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's actually a really tough thing for us. So, the data that we collect is literally what happens with the ball. What we don't quantify at the moment is what happens off it. But we do have technology that's evolving that tracks the other 22 players. And now what we're doing is saying, well, what impact does all those other guys have on the guy that has the ball and his ability to make the right decision? And so we are trying to quantify you stuck on the left wing and what impact you're having. It might be a lot, it might be not, but we don't know that at the moment.
We won 2-0 one time. Both times I was valuable.
There you go.
Anyway, I'm looking for Pat Carr. Pat, do you have any questions?
I have a million questions, but I can't afford any.
So Pat is a director at Sutton United Football Club, and is badass.
Well, I'm a Tranmere fan, so yes. Yeah, we'll talk later.
Again, I've got 1,000 questions. Anyone else want to go first? Stu on the front row.
I won't type of learn my lesson. This is really fascinating, thank you. I'm quite interested in those tensions you kind of referred to around when analytics come in and then the proper football men are going, but he's a good shape, that's more important. Like, how did that play out in football? Like, was it quite quick for people to say, no, we understand the value? Are there still people kind of holding out and going, I don't trust it?
Yeah, absolutely. That tension battle is still there in every football club probably in the world. Because ultimately, the guys that make the decisions are still generally those types of people. They're still the people who were ex-players, know the game, have done it, been there, seen it, done it, whatever. And you've got guys like me who've not played the game at the elite level telling them that actually the data says something different. And it's hard for them to kind of figure that out. But it is an evolving world, and I think what we're trying to do is help them realize that actually all we're trying to do is make them better, help them make better decisions, help them not make a fool of themselves quite so often. And that is really hard. And I think that's why the most important thing for me, and the thing that we try and teach the analysts and guys that we work with at clubs, is make sure you understand the game first, because you are much more equipped to understand the game than they are going to be to understand quantitative metrics and data. So you have to go more than halfway to get your message across, and then eventually they'll come to you.
Outstanding. I think that's all the time we have. That's all the time we have. We've got lunch across the way now. So Ben, thank you. Absolutely brilliant. Really appreciate your time.